And Mr. Hutton, I just want to thank you for your excellent report and work identifying the problems and trying to identify solutions to those problems. If I remember, I used to think that the Secretary of Homeland Security should be somebody with like our background, a prosecutor, law enforcement type, and then I thought, no, I think maybe a general would be like some military guy that could really run a tight ship, would be like perfect for that job. But more and more I'm starting to think that what we really need is a business leader at the top, somebody that, when I look at the problems of DHS and how to fix DHS, so many of these issues are management related more than anything, acquisition related or management. I'll leave that for the next president, whoever that is, to make that decision. But, I think like Steve Jobs, who was just brilliant in terms of business, if he was looking at his latest version of the iPhone and suddenly it cost 200% more than they thought, or he had cost overruns, or it was delayed, they were going to announce it was going to come out in September, but it didn't come out until like 2 years later. In the private sector, this just wouldn't, and I understand this is a different animal than the private sector, but that would not fly in the private sector. And so, and there were these 2008 guidelines that I think DHS, put forward, which were good, and I think you identified that, Mr. Hutton, in your report, and yet the department doesn't follow it for some reason. So let me just, Mr. Hutton, just go to you first. If you could just tell me what you, if you could just simply identify what you could perceive to be the problem, what you see would also put forward as the fix to this problem.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a number of points I think I could make on this. One, you referenced the private sector and what would the private sector do. The thing I would point out is that a lot of the processes and the steps and the decision points that you'll see in the current directive is really based on commercial practices, and it's all about also managing risk. And the private sector will, at the early stages, decide what kind of portfolio of projects they might want to take on, and they may have varying risks, but they have constant revisiting at early decision points. What do we know about these risks? What is it going to cost? And you kind of winnow down over time what they think is executable and what's going to help the bottom line of the company. But it's based on knowledge. It's based on stakeholder involvement. That could be the chief financial officer, business people. So the process is set, and you're asking about the execution. The way I see it, that 08 directive was a real important first step. And I say that because some of these requirements were in fact in place before 08. They required a lot of this knowledge-based approach. In fact, we issued a report in 2005 that said even what they had in place then resembled a knowledge-based approach largely, and it was all about execution. I think why I say 2008 was important, because what they did was try to come up with a common language to explain what they want the components to do and how to do it. And they worked very closely with the different components to adjudicate a lot of comments, get a lot of their understanding, a lot of conversations. And so it ended with that particular directive. But I think that was a real important step, because now everybody's talking a common language and I think should have a good understanding of what the requirements are. Why is it not being implemented? I'd say largely there were some capacity issues. I believe around the 08 timeframe, you had the Acquisition Program Management Division and they set up a cost analysis division. And I think you might have looked around 9 people. I believe 4 years later, they're up in the stages of shooting towards roughly 55. And these are folks that are going to help manage the process through the department, help provide cost estimating support. So I think capacity was one part of it. But I also think it's leadership and having someone at the USM's level that will drive the process and insist on adhering to the governance process. And I think our work is showing that since January, we're hearing more and more of the desire to do that.
Well, it's good news. 4 years later, now just suddenly the light bulb's on that, gee, we had a solution to this that we set forth in a directive 4 years ago, and now we're thinking about implementing it. But it's been 4 years. And so I guess to the other witnesses, and I know, Ms. Waters, you just came on board in March, so it may be unfair to pick on you, but why, Dr. Nyack, can you speak to why this has not been implemented and why it's taken 4 years to finally get this idea that, gee, we came up with a solution 4 years ago that may work, and now we're just finally starting to implement it?
So happy to add to what Mr. Hutton shared. You know, look, I've been here for a little bit less than 2 years, and I think Mark a little bit more than that, and obviously Karen's new to her role. And so it could possibly be, if we use 4 years, 4 years as the marker, that transition, you need steady leadership over time, and we've had it, and now we do actually have the results, as Mr. Hutton shared. A couple of things I just want to generally share with you, sort of on a positive note, and all under the heading of acquisition, generally speaking. GAO recently issued, in this month, I believe, a report on management integration, one on procurement oversight at the department, as well as this report that we're discussing today. Lots of positive news in the management integration report about the things we're actually doing, the things we're executing against that 08 directive that we've revised. Procurement oversight, I think, was one of the better GAO reports I've ever seen, and that's really in my wheelhouse. We've enhanced procurement oversight. And in investment management, in this report, we recognize, as Mr. Borkowski pointed out, there's cleanup to be done, and we're doing that. We've been living it for the last 2 years. It kind of starts out with the integrated investment life cycle, which essentially is going to have at the front end like a joint requirements body, fed by sort of functional information that cuts across the components, so that in the front end of acquisition, we're going to be discussing commonalities and what major requirements should be actually become programs eventually, after looking across the enterprise at what we already have, as well as even what other agencies have and DoD has. So you won't ever get programs birthed without being fully informed. That's the first thing. But on the back end, where we've got lots of cleanup to do in the acquisition review sort of world, and our more than 500 programs, 127 major programs, and what we classify as level 1 and level 2, about 40 of each of those. We've got lots of things in flight and are actually getting results. So just for instance, because it's been mentioned here, do we have enough credible cost estimates? Well, we didn't in the past. Is it increasing? The answer is yes. Do programs go through ARBs, and are they ever delayed? Are they ever stopped? The answer is yes. So we are forcing first of all, a common language, so everybody across the department now is informed about program information, the same information through the DST, through the quarterly program acquisition report, and also Congress is through our comprehensive acquisition status report. We're more transparent than ever about everything that's going on with our programs. Meanwhile, we double back behind to do the cleanup work while also making sure no program gets birthed unless it goes through this integrated investment life cycle. So I'm pretty confident that moving forward, that we need time to just execution, and we're doing it today. So it's not like we're saying we need 2 years to begin execution. We're executing right now.
Well, I think that's the good news. The bad news is you're still on GAO's high-risk list, despite all this good news. Mr. Borkowski?
Yes, I'd just like to also highlight there's a difference between knowledge management and documentation. See, that's part of the challenge here, right? So you mentioned STAMP. STAMP, we believe, has the knowledge management, but it's not documented in the appropriate format. So the question that we have, and this is part of that balancing past and future, do we go back and capture that knowledge management in the now current formats, or do we accept that the knowledge management is complete? Another, I think, that you might find intriguing is that in the case of SBI Net, that scored very highly in terms of the documentation complete, and yet we know what the status of that was. So as we do that balancing between past and future, it is very important we get on a common language, because one of the problems that the department has with STAMP is, okay, we have to spend all of this time confirming knowledge management. If we had had it in the right format, that would have been nearly the lift it is. But I think that's important as we look at digging out as opposed to going forward. It is very important to have a common language, but let's not confuse knowledge management with documentation.
Ms. Waters, do you have any remarks?
No, thank you.
Okay, you're very smart. Is it, Mr. Hutton, it's my understanding that in terms of procurement or acquisition, that it's still very siloed within the department in terms of the 22 different components coming together. They're still not, they're not really brought together. Is that correct?
Well, if you take it from the point of view of program management and the large acquisitions, I would say that they're breaking down some of those silos, because what they've done is the Program Accountability and Risk Management Group, they moved it up under the Undersecretary of Management, and then they established a component acquisition executive. So now you have a link between the department level governance process and the component level to work together to ensure that the department's requirements are being met, and then folks like Mr. Bukowski will work within the component so that when they are going to an investment review meeting, that through his great work, he's going to ensure that they do have the knowledge and they do have it properly documented. And I'll just say documentation is important, though, because it has to go forward to the department. The department is buying off on these large investments, many of them that are going to cost, go out 20 years, cost billions of dollars, and you have to know when you're approving those programs at the start that you're making that commitment, because if you don't know that, you may end up at a point in time where you start managing so many programs and the budget's forcing decisions where you start adding this funding instability and other things that we talk about, which then starts creating problems for the program managers to be able to execute their program. So I think the documentation provides that added buy-in from the department, but it also facilitates some accountability as well.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I mean, I can see how, somebody in the department's like, yeah, I got all this paperwork I got to do, and they think it's kind of cumbersome, burdensome, and not necessary. But when you are talking about, particularly these level one programs, I mean, they're billions of dollars. And I can't think of it in the private sector. I think, that would, they would certainly have I think paperwork that would have to be, completed. So from what I'm hearing from you, though, these silos are not, there is a merger now in terms of acquisition policies, is what you're saying. That's happening.
Well, from my view now, there's more communication. I think there's better understanding. In our survey, and I would recommend everyone take a look at our survey in the back of the report. It was an outstanding survey. The 77 major program offices that we surveyed had a 92% response rate, but there are a whole bunch of questions in there that give a reflection of the program manager's view, program office's view of their initiatives that they're undertaking now, what they think about PARM's role. PARM actually got, and I'm not saying that as I'm surprised, but they really got some pretty high scores in terms of familiarity with what PARM's doing and also what value they think PARM is bringing to the programs. And this is fairly recent. And that's why I think our survey is really like a health assessment. Dr. Nyack has a nice health assessment for his procurements. But if people go into that survey, there's a lot of questions that aren't really teased out in the report, but it's going to give you a good insight of what the ones that are on the ground trying to make these programs work, what they think about the department's requirements, the department's initiatives, and things like that. That said, I do want to make one point, though, sir. In January of 2011 is when we kind of started really working, back and forth with the department in their efforts to get off the high risk. We submitted 5 outcomes to the department in the acquisition management area back in September 2010. January 2011, the department came out with a strategy to get off the high risk, which includes acquisition management. That strategy was about 55 pages, and we had some feedback to the department where we thought that strategy could be improved. They've had subsequent 6-month period strategies. They're now at a strategy, not saying more pages is better, but they're at about almost 300 pages in their current strategy, but they're starting to better link the outcomes that we expect them to take as to the root causes of why they haven't done it in the past. And so I think that back and forth has helped a lot in promoting this. But one of the major features is this integrated investment lifecycle model. And what our survey, that was introduced in January 11. What's a little concerning to me is that when we surveyed the program offices, 32 of the 47 of the program offices, and this was response in the March of this year, said that they really weren't too familiar with it yet. So I think if you're going to drive this down through the organization, I think it's imperative that they keep talking and communicating. Yes, it's not fully developed yet. They're working through a lot of different things. We're open-minded about the approach they're taking. We want to see it play out. It's their solution, but we think communication with the components and constant interaction will help create a better likelihood of a good outcome in that effort.
Yeah, and it's an excellent point that they still remain on the high-risk list. Are you optimistic that the DHS will be off that list in the future, near future?
Sir, for context, DOD's been on the high-risk list for acquisition since '92, the Department since 2005. We're talking, as Dr. Bukowski said, these are very complex systems. It's a lot of money. There's a lot of inherent risks. You take it back to the need to go through a knowledge-based approach. You're not going to get perfection. Even with the best knowledge-based approach, it comes down to individual decisions you make at each point in time along the way. And so I would say that given the fact that they got so many programs without a lot of the foundational documents that's going to allow them to have the insight to make those good decisions, given that they have to get those developed and also approved by the department so they know what they're buying and what capability they're buying.
And I appreciate your kind of relationship in view of this. I mean, it's like a diagnostic test, almost like a doctor would make an analysis on your health, and you're not doing quite as well, so you're on a high-risk list, but here's how you can get off of it. And I think that kind of relationship working together is the productive way to move forward and get off the list. And I hope, hopefully I can share in your optimism at some point that they'll be off the list. Last point, because I'm taking a lot of time, but I guess. Just the two of us. I can't, Mr. Barkas, I can't let you go without asking you about one of my favorite issues, and that's border technology. And you and I went down there and looked at some DoD assets technology. And I still think, given these budgetary constraints we live in, that Mr. Quayle and I talked to the generals in Afghanistan and Iraq about transferring some of this technology and leveraging existing technology within the federal government that we've already invested R&D money into. It's nothing, you have to recreate this stuff. And I know you have some good news on that front, but I want to give you an opportunity to maybe talk a little bit about that issue in terms of what you're leveraging and where do we stand at this point in time with respect to the border and the technology initiative.
Well, very quickly, we have built a much stronger real-time relationship with various elements of the Department of Defense that are helping us through this. So we are aware of the availability of all kinds of technologies, everything from non-intrusive inspection systems to aerostats to handheld, long-range night imaging information. We've received a whole inventory of those things. I've sent teams out to Army depots to survey what's in that inventory and prepare to perhaps lay some claim to some of those things. And for some of the systems, in particular aerostats and the towers that support them, we've actually worked with the Department of Defense to evaluate those systems on the Texas border in August. We actually had 2 aerostats and 2 towers. And what we find, by the way, is that these things are very effective systems. What we are evaluating is what do they actually cost for us? What do we have to do to train our people? We want to make sure that we don't go into this without complete knowledge. Again, that's knowledge-based. We don't want to do the SBI net thing with the DoD technology. We want to make very clear that as we go into using this technology, we are aware of what the complete bill will be. I will tell you that those, particularly those aerostats, are very effective. So we're in the process of evaluating those results, making some trades with cost, looking at the inventory of things that the Department of Defense has that are oftentimes more modest things. In fact, the relationship is such that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon's a couple blocks from my office, has actually left some of these things in my storage room so that we can actually try them out that way. So I think the relationship is getting better. I do want to be a little cautious. We do need to do some cost evaluation to make sure we can actually afford them, but it looks very promising.
Good to hear. I got a phone call from Commissioner Aguilar actually updating me on the aerostat program, and specifically in Texas. And I just want to say how much I appreciate getting that phone call. And I thought that was a real positive step to say, hey, here's some good news, what we're doing on the border. Are we still looking at, when do you, I think the fence is up, you get more personnel, we can always use more resources, but when I hear it's going to take 10 more years to secure the border, that just doesn't go over well with my constituents. Where are we right now?
Well, with the Arizona, first of all, the DOD systems. The DOD systems, the way that we're currently looking at them, they give us an opportunity to put some deployments and a shot in the arm in areas that the Arizona deployment doesn't cover, right? So we're still planning to do that Arizona deployment, but as you recall, the rest of the border was intended to follow that. We reserve the option, working with you, to change that. We are seeing things, for example, going on in southern Texas that concern us. But right now, the plan is to buy the things for Arizona and then extend beyond that. So one advantage of this DOD interaction is it may give us systems outside of Arizona more quickly than we thought. Having said that, the Arizona plan itself, many of the smaller systems have been bought. Those agent portable surveillance systems, which we went and looked at down in Laredo, we have 15 of those in Arizona. We've been using them, continue to evaluate them. Mobile surveillance systems are coming online. We've been doing some testing with the vendors, but that's about done. Those will come online. The two big items that people spend time on are the remote video surveillance system cameras. Those are day and night cameras that go on towers, and the integrated fixed towers, which are cameras and radars tied together in areas. Both of those are in what we know as source selection. We've sent out requests to industry for proposals. The bids have come back in. The remote video surveillance system is coming close to the end of that process. We have to evaluate those. The integrated fixed towers will take a while. Now, there's a good news, bad news to that. We got so many more proposals for that than I have ever seen in my life, and it takes a long time to do due diligence with those proposals. So I'm very, very pleased by the number of proposals we've got, because that suggests that all the communication we did with industry on it's non-developmental, it doesn't have to do everything. If it does a lot and it's a good deal, that's good enough. It seems like that worked. The downside of that is I've just got to slog through all of those proposals. But we do have the proposals in. We are in the source selection process for those.
I do think those integrated fixed towers are really going to transform the security down there on the border. And I agree. I sort of empathize with your situation where we're pressuring you to get this done as quickly as possible, and yet then we're pointing the finger in procurement, acquisition failures, and that sort of thing. So you got a lot of proposals coming in. You got to weigh them and make sure you're making the right decision. I would appreciate if you would just continue to update me personally, and I think the committee as a whole, because we get asked about this issue a lot when we go back home, and I think if I can give my constituents and others on the committee a more positive outlook, that would be good, because I think the current impression with a lot of the American people is that there's no security at all down there, and that's in fact not the case. You and I know that. But the more updates you can give me, the more I can be a messenger that we're actually moving forward. So I appreciate that. And with that, I now recognize the ranking member.